Welcome in to Wednesday, May 17th. You know what time it is, Don Callahan?
It's time for the noon dish.
It is noon. Therefore, the noon dish with Don Callahan
And Tommy Ashley.
and Tommy Ashley. I'm just here. New name for the show. Shout out to the winner. I promise you that hat is currently in a box awaiting mailing. I've been a little busy.
Who
Check out.
was the person that won?
I'm not going to give his name. I don't have his board name in front of me. I will find it
Ah,
as we talk. But he's a local guy and
okay.
love supporting local. You can't. I'm all about supporting local stuff. And
Maybe you should drop it off at his house.
well, I floated that idea, but there was no
Okay.
response. So I'm cool with that. I've got no problem. I do know where it is because by local I do mean small townish area. But
Okay.
anyway, so we're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, of course. Noon Dish. Shout out to Michelle Hillison for knocking out our graphic. Even got a nice layover that we opened with the show. See, I can cover Don up by throwing up the logo. Um, thought about a plate of food. Thought about all sorts of stuff, but settled on a clock with the noon hour arriving, and here we are. Don Callahan. I'm going to tip it to you, Don, because you like to recognize folks right out of the gate. So let's get
Yeah.
started as people filter in.
Yeah. So our MVP, Preston from Greensboro, one of my all-time favorites. Always contributed back during the dark times of this podcast, and always throws in some jabs at Ross Martin, which is always fun to read. So this podcast, this stream is dedicated to you, Preston from Greensboro.
Well, it'll just for folks for future reference. Get
Alan's
in.
here. Alan's here after not being here last week when the podcast was dedicated to him last week.
I know, and we literally like gave away $1,000 gift certificate
Yeah.
to Johnny T-Shirt, and he didn't show up. So
No,
we had to
we had to
find
use
somewhere
it.
else. But no, in seriousness, no $1,000 gift certificates, but Johnny T-Shirt certainly the place to visit. If you're watching this, you know that it's Tar Heel, the Inside Carolina Tar Pit Premium message boards, and you get that by subscribing, and you get that Johnny T-Shirt 10% off. It's just like $1,000 gift card if you spend enough money, like
Yeah,
most
if
of
you
us do have.
spend, what would that be? ten
Well,
thousand
10%,
dollars.
yeah. If you spend 10 grand, you get your 10,000. You get your 10. I don't do math. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it now. We got a ton to talk about. We got a top five at the end of the show. So submit your top five streaming series. And we've sort of gone back and forth on what qualifies. I'm going to say, I'm going to break my own rule, but it needs to be on some streaming service. So if it was
Well,
on,
that's the problem. You name me a show, and nowadays you can find it on a streaming service.
exactly. So say if you watched Game of Thrones, which might be in my top five, that was on HBO. It's now streaming on HBO Max. It counts. So anything
Well,
like that.
so my thinking was if we just keep it narrow, then we don't run out of top fives. So we could do top five dramas because I think that's what most people watch for their binge-worthy stuff, and then maybe down the lane we do top five comedy shows or whatever. Because to me, I'm not going to include them in this top five that I have. I don't want to give away my top five, but my two all-time favorite shows, Seinfeld and The Office, are awesome.
But they're
And
not. That doesn't count. Those are
why not?
TV because they're TV shows.
But that's what I'm saying. You can get them on a streaming service.
But no, they're TV show. I let the chat decide. The
Okay.
chat can decide what.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not going to have them on my top five, even though they are all time, and I watch them still all the time.
I'm not a big comedy person, to be honest with you.
Me neither, but they're great to put on if I'm doing a lot of work and I need to kind of have something to take my mind off every now and then to kind of, especially The Office.
Okay, well, I need to watch it because all I hear is that's what she said. That's what he said
So
all the
you have
time.
never seen The Office?
I have never watched a complete episode of The Office.
Okay,
Look,
so
man, we got to get through.
all
Folks
right, yeah,
didn't
we
come
got to
here to
start.
hear us
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about The
yeah.
Office. Folks came to hear about Alex Taylor. They came to hear about Don Callahan's elevator up and down on the recruiting scale. couple questions that we missed last week that I promised folks we would get to this week, and then maybe some 2025 action. Don, let's start out right out of the gate with Alex Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Big name on North Carolina's board, a position that North Carolina has been able to attract big names and put up big numbers. Just tell us a little bit about what you've learned in the last week. You've got an article on the Premium Board about Alex Taylor. Social media has been a buzz with Alex Taylor. What's the latest on the young man?
So it's kind of the quiet before the storm, really, for him, because he has his official visit scheduled for June. Those will determine what's going to happen. And so there's just right now, there's not going to be a whole lot of movement because those official visits are going to cause the movement, you know? And so let me just lay out his official visit schedule that he has right now starts with June 2nd, Clemson, and then goes on to, where did I not have?
I've got it in front of me. See, I'm beating you to the punch. You got Virginia Tech, June 7th.
Okay.
State trip the 16th. And then as it currently stands, Carolina gets the last spot on the 23rd of June ahead of a commitment date that he has set. It goes back to what we talked about last week or in one of these shows. And quite frankly, we do these weekly, but I swear I see you every day. And I can't figure out if that's
maybe it's because you see me in your dreams.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that disturbing? But it feels like just yesterday I was sitting right here. But we talked about that, getting either the first or last official visit. Where do you think that? Where do you think that sort of sits up for North Carolina here?
So in this specific situation, you want the last one because of the fact that he has a decision date July 27th, and if you get that last weekend, you are giving him the final in-person recruiting pitch, and you can combat and match whatever has happened in prior official visits. But now he denies this, but the perception from a lot of people is that Clemson is his leader and that there is a chance that he could go into his Clemson official visit and just commit and shut it down there. So obviously that doesn't make that weekend, that last weekend of June, all that appealing because, UNC is going to be holding its breath throughout that weekend that he's in Clemson, and if he can kind of get out of there and be not committed and no sort of rumblings of a potential silent commitment or anything like that or whatsoever, then North Carolina can kind of breathe easy and do what it needs to do during its official visit weekend. So,
yeah, let me ask a random question off of that. Silent commitments, what are they worth?
So there are different types of silent commitments. If a kid, and what we're seeing now, if you've noticed with some of the commitments North Carolina has had in this class, a lot of guys, they commit while they're on campus. And then what they do is, one, they want the edit, which for those who aren't big on Twitter is just a graphic that either the school will make for the kid or they'll get some third party to kind of make them that says that they committed and they post it on Twitter and on Instagram and all that sort of stuff. That kind of takes some time. Also, a lot of kids want to let the other coaches who were recruiting them know, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do. They don't want those coaches to find out through social media, and that takes time. Some kids are able to get all that stuff done after a couple of days. There are a couple of instances where it took a couple of weeks. That, to me, is a legit silent commitment. Now, what has happened in the past, I'm going to try to be very careful with this, is you got people who claim to have information, and they say, oh, this kid is going to – I actually don't think we've seen it too much on IC, on the Tar Pit recently. But there were, a couple of years ago, there were some people who claimed to have information, said this kid was going to commit on this upcoming weekend. And when the commitment didn't happen, their excuse was, oh, well, he silently committed. And I can remember Jaquarius Conley was a great example, a kid who I had a really, 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 really good relationship with. And there was one of these posters said that he had committed and all of that. And both him and his dad denied that happened. And I actually, when he actually committed, I was besides UNC, I was the first person to know. So I have no reason to believe that they lied to me. So anyway, so those sort of silent commitments are just garbage. But if a kid goes on a visit, silently commits and says, hey, look, let me get everything else in order, that's legit because he's not taking any more visits. He's not talking to any other schools. He's just tying up loose ends, doing the right thing, wants to make it sure it's presented and that sort of thing.
So if I silently commit to you, but then I say, well, I'm gonna go out with some other sites, football recruiting expert. Does that sort of wipe away your belief in my silent commitment?
If you're supposedly a silent commitment and you are still visiting schools and you don't have a commitment date set, then you're not a silent commit.
How many kids commit that way and tell coaches? In other words,
there are
in
kids.
your career, hold on.
Go ahead.
I know you're excited, and this is a great question.
I'm talking to Tommy.
I
what I mean?
I
I get
understand.
excited.
I've been talking to a lot of people, and you're one of my favorite.
Mhm.
How many kids or how many players commit, announce it, and all the hullabaloo that comes with it without telling the other coaches their intentions? Like the I don't want to say the losing coaches, but the coaches that did not get that commitment.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how to quantify that because it's so hard to tell. You know what I mean? I think nowadays it's typically what they do. So I think most of them do it. But yeah, I don't. It's hard for me to even tell. I mean, I'm sure it definitely happens, but I couldn't even put a number on it.
You know what the best thing about that mic stand where it is?
What's that?
It blocks your face and allows us to see your haircut and the full salt and pepper going on there. I think we need to fix that because folks want to see Don Callahan. So when they see him roaming the grounds of Grimsley High School or elsewhere, they know who they're looking at. Don, when you look at your elevator in your weekly scoop, and as I've said here on this podcast multiple times, we are not going to rehash the weekly scoop every week. If you want to read that in detail, Don puts a ton of work into that, as does Ben and everybody else involved in it to get it accurate, to get it on the site. Go check it out. But let's talk about a few things from that, and the elevator is one of them. Corey Duff, you're speaking of edits. It's pretty sharp edit for KJ in his top 7, but he included North Carolina on that school list. What's that mean for North Carolina?
Well, really, it's kind of formality for him because he had already scheduled the official visit to North Carolina. So we kind of knew. I mean, I think it's safe to say North Carolina is probably in his top 5. So this is more of like just kind of, hat tipping to North Carolina. So in the whole scheme of things, it doesn't matter too much. And the same thing with the next guy who came out the top 7. Yeah, that you're going to talk about too.
Yep, Javarius Green. Tell us. That's another one of those sharp edits. I don't know which one I like the best there.
Yeah, these are cool. Some of the guys the third parties who do the edits, they use the same filter. And I'm just like, oh my God, you do like 1,000 of these in a week and you use the same one. I guess it makes it easier, but yeah, let's get some creativity. Both of these are pretty creative. So
I see. I'm looking at here. There's some mascots on there missing from his. What's it going to take for Inside Carolina podcast hosts and personalities to get some edits? I think we need to work on that. That would be fun there. I don't know if they do one out in front of the old folks' home that I would need, but it would be pretty cool to see, like the assisted living place be prominently featured in an edit.
Well, we did have. So I don't know if you remember. God, I forget his name. He went to Huff High School, defensive tackle. He came out with his top 5. He announced his whole big top 5 and ended up being top 5 fast food places.
Nice.
And then Amarius Williams from Clinton High School, he came out with his top 3, and it was top 3. I think it was chicken places. I think he went Zaxby's, Bojangles, I think Chick-fil-A. Or no, it was fast food. So I think he went McDonald's for his 3rd.
Well,
but anyway, I think
any list without Popeye's chicken is a fail.
I've never had Popeyes.
Dude, you have no idea. And it's great because it doesn't you don't need Prilosec to eat Popeyes like you do with Bojangles these days. Too much information. Let's continue to roll. Hey, I told you we're gonna have fun on these shows. Down, Bodie Cahoon. We talked about him last week. He
Yeah.
committed to Notre Dame. Unexpected, expected. What you think?
The timing is a little unexpected because he had official visits scheduled, including one to North Carolina in early June. But kind of talking to him, it seemed like Notre Dame was something that really interested him. And then there was a lot of buzz coming out. That was the last school that he visited this spring, so a lot of buzz there. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have shocked me coming out of this summer for him to commit to Notre Dame, but to commit before the official visits is a surprise. And obviously the main thing it does for North Carolina, so they have Evan Bennett committed at linebacker. They're willing to take two more, at least they would like at least one. This basically the pool of guys that they're looking at, unless they offer someone else. The pool they're looking at now is down to two, which is Cruz Law from Tennessee and Ashton Woods, who's from Marietta, Georgia.
Yeah. So, and going back to another discussion we had as far as the official visits and the numbers of the official visits. I mean, players can go on as many as they want. We've talked about that, but schools only have 56, I believe.
Yeah.
Isn't it a benefit or a help for schools if a player's going to commit somewhere like Notre Dame to go ahead and do it and not waste an official visit at
Yeah.
Carolina or any
Yeah.
school like that?
Yeah, I think so. I guess if you wanted to counter that, the counter would be, well, at least if you got him on campus for an official visit, you could try to swing the momentum back in your direction. But yeah, I mean, if a kid knows by this point, then yeah, I'm sure they would rather save that official visit for another kid.
Yeah, and then last person on your list, Jalen Thompson, Jalon Thompson.
Jalen Thompson.
Some people don't mind messing up names. I do my best not to mess up a
I
name. So
I hate messing up names. I will. I'm a big. I'll go and look on the pronunciations.com. For last names, first names, that sort of thing.
I
I'm
think it's a
glad.
sign of respect, right, to get it right.
Yeah. And I'm glad that we're in a profession where at least half the people we deal with we can just refer to as coach, and it gets us by. You know what I
Well,
mean?
Brown's pretty simple, right?
Yeah,
It's not.
Brown and Matt, and he doesn't even mind Mac. Yeah. So the thing with him is that, and we did a story on him last week, and he's flying a little bit under the radar. We haven't covered him as much as we probably should have, so it's partially our fault. But he's made a bunch of visits to North Carolina, and he's an Orlando kid. Hasn't visited a whole lot of other places. He has an official visit scheduled with North Carolina, which I think, on the heels of all these other visits to Chapel Hill, is pretty significant. I know he's actually really high on UNC's board, even though his ranking, is he even ranked? Okay, so they have him as a high 3-star. I guess that's pretty good. But yeah, so it's UNC's pretty high on him. So I think this is a significant development for the long run.
So, and again, this is the Noon Dish live at noon on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, May 17th today. Appreciate everybody that's joined us in the chat. We get a ton of views after the fact, and I understand it's difficult to join us on a lunch day in the middle of the week, but much appreciated to folks that are always here. And I want to ask you a question, Don, about that was posed last week that we missed. And I told the listener and the viewer that we would get to it. And so here we are. He wanted to know what was our opinion, or what was your opinion on Coach Brown's comments at a Rams Club gathering in Charlotte, which they do the circuit all the time, that North Carolina maybe the NIL recruit aspect of everything was going to keep North Carolina out of some recruitments. What is your take? And I don't want to misinterpret the question, but I think that's the angle, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what is your thought here on how NIL is going to affect the recruiting game for a school like North Carolina? And it's not just North Carolina. It's basically everybody except You know, the usual suspects. We always hear you can go and look at a recruit's top 5 or top 7 or top 10, and it's the usual quote unquote suspects are in there. Then you can see what's sort of important. Maybe I don't know if that's totally fair, but usually. So, what's your take on this, Don? I mean, NIL is a gigantic factor in college athletics now,
Hmm.
and so how does that affect recruiting for a place like North Carolina?
So this is an analogy that I stole, and I don't think I can actually credit who gave it to me. But the best analogy is to look at it like baseball. Where you have the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Red Sox, who spend tons of money, and even though there's a luxury tax, there's all these things in place to try to keep the rosters balanced. There's clearly not a balanced roster in MLB like it is in other sports. And so I think that's what we're going to ultimately see in college football. I mentioned it, I think it was last week. I think it was in a prior weekly scoop about Braylon Staley, the wide receiver from South Carolina, who North Carolina is bringing in for an official visit towards the end of June. And I mentioned the fact that North Carolina looks like it's in a good spot. Clemson is going to be tough to beat, in-state, all that sort of stuff. But in addition to all that, you got Tennessee and Miami, who it's so hard to tell because a lot of this stuff is just hearsay. But I think it's pretty clear the evidence or just the appearance that Miami and Tennessee are two programs who have definitely taken advantage of the new NIL rules, which makes a recruitment like Staley's, very difficult for North Carolina to compete in. And so I think you're going to see stuff like that. When certain programs get involved, it's going to make it difficult for UNC to compete with, to be honest, because there's certain, collectives or certain situations that they have gone all in on. And I think you'll see situations like, well, I think for the most part, we're probably seeing who the powers are going to be within this NIL game. But one of the interesting things, you see a program like Michigan State, which was not a recruiting powerhouse. They've pulled in some really good recruits. Louisville, another one. They pulled in some really good recruits at one point before Satterfield left. Who was their coach?
Satterfield was there.
Satterfield. Okay. They had like the top running back in the nation committed, and I don't follow it close enough to know what happened there, but I know that some of the rumors were just the NIL stuff. So that obviously puts Louisville in a different sort of situation. So I think you're going to see that become more of a factor, and North Carolina is going to be at disadvantage unless, it has a collective that helps, but I think the collective, from my understanding, its focus is more about get to North Carolina, play well, you'll get paid, not here's some money to come to North Carolina, which I think a lot of these programs do. And in some situations, it's probably a little bit of a, like Miami, I wouldn't trust that at all on what they're offering. And
Yeah.
plus, it's illegal.
Yeah, I mean, inducements to come
Yeah,
are
it's
far
complete.
different than what NIL was designed for.
Yes.
And so I think folks need to understand that there are rules, and whether or not anybody follows them is another discussion altogether. But some places are going to follow them, or at least try to follow them and try to adhere to them the best they can. And paying a guy $1 million to come to your school is not part of that process. So, Don, on the flip side, or to go along with that, you sort of mentioned the Major League Baseball analogy, and it's a great one. But then you look at a team like the Tampa Bay Rays,
Mm-hmm.
who have consistently not paid them enough,
Mm-hmm.
but have developed guys, have found
Yes.
guys through their farm system, which is akin to recruiting or in whatever, and they have developed them. So that sort of tilts the balance for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I'll say this: it's pretty clear that Nick Saban and some of the greatest coaches ever are great at what they do. But I'm not sure how tough it is to win the most when you consistently have the best players. You know what I mean? That
Mhm.
that, that is kind of like, okay, Don drives a Prius, I drive a Ferrari. Let's race. I don't care
Mhm.
how good a driver you are, Don. I'm gonna
Mhm.
smoke you in the race with my Ferrari. So it puts but you might be able to navigate the curves better than me, and it's sort of to turn that analogy around and get lost in the weeds. It's going to turn it on the coaches to develop guys to have their own recruiting boards, to find those quote unquote diamonds in the rough that the ranking services either have lower ranked or missed, and then develop them. That's the biggest aspect of this, I think, for everybody not named Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Michigan State, like you mentioned. Your thoughts on that aspect of all of this?
Yeah, so I think there are definitely programs who've done a really good job of developing kids, far succeeding their recruiting rankings. Wake Forest, Iowa, Wisconsin. There's a bunch of others that I'm forgetting about. But the problem is there's a ceiling there. You aren't going to. We have not seen any program like that win or even really compete for a national championship. Now, if you want to contend for a conference championship, yeah, I'm sure you can do those. You can do that with that sort of roster. But if the goal is to compete for a national championship, win national championships, you got to be giving that money out. Because that's the programs that are winning it, and we see what happens when someone who's kind of outside of that group. We saw that in the last national championship game. A team that's outside of that group, what happened, is they got stomped by Georgia.
Yep. It's an interesting dynamic, and it's one that college coaches, including the ones at North Carolina, have to navigate. And one of my favorite things to hear, and you hear this a lot, is uh, folks are angry about their team's success, but they don't want to donate the money to help that
Yeah.
team succeed. And it's not, trust me, most folks watching this know where I live, and know that UNC is not the primary sort of fan base around here. And I hear it all the time from those other folks as well. Multiple teams in the same boat that have to deal with that aspect of it. But the thing about NIL, and the thing about one of the questions in the chats, do you donate to Heels for Life or do you donate to the Rams Club? Well, there's a big question in all of this, and it's not just Carolina, it's across the board for schools trying to compete, especially in college, the big time college sports. And quite frankly, all the teams, North Carolina, we talk about football all the time. We talk about basketball all the time. Well, baseball, that is an aspect of it in NIL there, even on down to some of the bigger Olympic sports. I mean, the money factor is real and a deal. Let me talk. Anything left on that before we
No, I
go
think
to a
we covered
Johnny
it. I mean,
T-shirt?
we obviously can go like 5 hours on it, but I think we covered the majority of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the old "put your money where your mouth is" type thing is as real as ever in college sports, and I'm not quite sure I like it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just yelling at clouds. Maybe it is what it
No,
is.
I'm with you. I mean, it's not. It makes it less fun. It does because you kind of because I can remember a time, and everyone knows I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I can remember a time where the season starts and you're thinking, okay, if we go undefeated, we can win a national championship, and now it's just almost like you're starting to kind of see where the ceilings are for a lot of these programs.
Yeah. So anyway, Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com, sponsors of this podcast, sponsors of Inside Carolina, and you, the premium subscriber, get 10% off your everyday order, online or in person. Personally, I would go there and see them because they're wonderful folks. I
Hmm.
mean, everybody that works there, just a wonderful group, great store. Visit them there, visit them online, get your 10% off. Baseball team's still rolling. Gigantic series this weekend with Clemson. Clemson's worked themselves from last in the ACC to a chance to be a national seed. Carolina's got an opportunity to host if they can handle business. And Johnny T-shirt's got all the gear you possibly could need to pull for the baseball team or any other team or even school at North Carolina. Visit them, take care of them. National Guys Will Pay the Bills. It's Noon Dish. It's 12:30. We'll be right back. Okay, Donnie Callahan, it's the Noon Dish. Shout out to the new name. Love it, actually. But I'll freely admit I am a little hungry right now. Hadn't had breakfast. Working on preparing to talk to Don Callahan.
Mm.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question. Transfer portal. We've seen the outflow for North Carolina, even in the second window or the second coming of the portal. Where does the scholarship aspect of all this? We always talk about the limits or whatever. Where does that scholarship aspect come into the portal, especially this time of year, going into summer and summer schools, first and second sessions ahead of fall camp?
So, wait, I'm lost in your question because we have a question in here. Do you want me to just answer this?
Yeah.
Okay,
Are
so
any more? I teed you up.
okay.
And
Are
then
more
let's go on.
scholarships being held for transfers or high school kids? I mean, it's definitely way more for high school kids. It's not even close. And I think a lot of it is you recruit, or at least the approach that I believe North Carolina is taking. And a lot of this, all these programs are still kind of getting a feel for things. They're starting to have a grasp on it, but they're still kind of learning and still kind of maneuvering. But the feeling is that UNC is recruiting high school kids with the purpose of signing a full class, with the idea though that you want to have some scholarship space for after the season. But a lot of that, not all of it now, a lot of it is only going to be to kind of fill what sort of your starter needs there would be. I mean, Mac Brown is a little bit more open to bringing guys on who might not necessarily be starters or might just be competing for a starting job but provide depth, sort of thing. But I think it's still a priority if you're going to the portal to bring in someone who's going to start, and that the basis of your program is going to be built off of the high school ranks. And we've gone over a bunch of reasons why in the past why that is more important. It's so important to still have the foundation of your program be from the high school ranks. But yeah, I mean, UNC is going to sign, my guess, roughly a full class. Now, there were times last year where UNC, like for example, the amount of offensive linemen they wanted to sign, they didn't reach that through the high school ranks. What they decided to what they basically said was, all right, guys that we actually like, really we've kind of maxed out that pool. Plus, we would like some help from the transfer portal. So let's just save these scholarships for the transfer portal, and that's what they ended up doing, during that first transfer portal. So there are situations like that occur, but the majority of an incoming class is going to be high school kids.
Question from the message board, Tar Heel Wizard. How many additional players you think Carolina will add from the transfer portal? They added the new kicker, whose name escapes me, and I apologize to that young man.
Yeah, he's a walk-on, so it's kind of, he's not an initial counter until he's put on scholarship. So it's kind of doesn't fall into this category. But go ahead.
Right, and is offensive line still viewed as a need? I think, and I'll get your take on this. What's the most valuable position on the field?
Oh, quarterback.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
What's second?
So it's a matter of opinion.
Okay. What is your educated opinion?
Man.
I think a lot of people would say an edge rusher, a high quality edge rusher, and then I'd probably go D tackle, a difference maker.
Well, I think the thing is that, a lot of people will say this, is that to find human beings with the size and mobility to play the offensive defensive line, there's just not a lot of them. So obviously that's supply and demand. Whereas if you have a shutdown cornerback, that's great, but there's so many DBs that kind of fit that profile and are good football players, but it's just so hard to find large human beings who move really, really well.
Yeah, and the evaluation of offensive linemen it's got to be the toughest thing. It's different in the portal, which is why they're so valuable in the portal.
because they're developed.
They're developed, they're
Mhm.
grown. Whether they can play or not. If they're tough or soft at that point.
Yeah.
So when people ask about offensive line as a need, I think it's always a need. Carolina's
Well,
pretty solid
well, I
across.
think the
Go ahead.
question, it sounds like to me, and I might be reading this wrong, but you, I guess before this season, that's what it sounds like. Like, is North Carolina going to add any more before the season? And my answer is, I think there's a very high likelihood that UNC is done adding to this class from a scholarship, or done adding to this roster from a scholarship standpoint. I don't think they're just, the portal window closed. What was it, 2 weeks ago? More than 2 weeks ago, and there hasn't been any sort of movement with any guys. I mean, there's always the chance that a grad transfer, because they can enter whenever they want. But I just don't see at this point North Carolina adding to its roster prior to this upcoming season.
Indeed, and yeah, I mean, certain positions are like gold nuggets in the portal, and they're treated as such. By the big schools, by all the schools. So it's an interesting dynamic to watch. So let's turn, since you talked about this cycle, let's turn to the next cycle, which is ridiculous that we're talking about 2025 guys. Don, you put up your weekly scoop this week, and you had the 2025 primer. It just feels like it's so early for 2025. Tell me why it's not. Tell me why this cycle, and why the cycles heat up like they do already at this time of the year, 2 years in advance.
So, because in addition to the official visits, which are obviously going to take center stage for the for June, on this, is it the side stage? Is that what who's has this word?
Center stage is the most important.
I'm talking about when you go to um your strip joints. Is this
What?
the side stage or back? What is it that they're dancing on? Because you got the one on the front stage, and
The
anyway.
champagne room? Yeah, no, this is not that. I don't know if that's what you're talking about either. We'll talk about the secondary stage, the opening act.
So
We're gonna
the
get fired.
the yeah, so the 2025 guys are going to be making a bunch of visits over the summer, and that's going to kind of help shape their recruitments. And so a lot of these names, I mean, we've already seen there's already 2 quarterbacks North Carolina has offered from the 2025 class that have already decided to go in a different direction. We're kind of sort of seeing, UNC. I mean, they base at quarterback, for example. Let me just throw that out there. We got Bryce Baker, who's an in-state guy in the Kernersville, North Carolina. We got Blake Herbert from Massachusetts, who was just recently offered, and his recruitment just kind of sort of started, so it's hard to kind of gauge where he's at. And then Luke Nickel from Alpharetta, Georgia, who has already visited once and intends on coming back in June. So we're already kind of seeing what UNC's at least initial attack for the quarterback position looks like for the 2025 class, which is basically, I'm trying to show my point is like, hey, things are developing here. Maybe not at other positions, but definitely at the quarterback position. And the other positions are going to start. We're going to start to kind of see some development, start to see who the main targets are starting during the summer time.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, a prime time for kids to visit and get noticed and get camps in and all that kind of stuff. So check out Don's scoop on the Tar Pit Premium message board. It's pretty in depth, man. I'm impressed by the names and the amount of names you're able to put together and go through. I mean, I can't imagine. I know how my teenagers were or are. I can't imagine trying to track down this large amount of names that you talk to every week and put it together. It's fascinating. Definitely worth the read. Not going to give it away. Folks got to check it out. What's the best name on your list, though? We can do that. I think
Ooh.
Camden Laudenschlager,
Okay.
a Jack out of Owing Mills,
All
Maryland.
right. Yeah, I can
Might
give you that.
might be my all-name team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good direction. Yeah, I don't think anyone else kind of. There's Brett Clatterball, I guess, which sounds like a character from South Park.
And then Onus is in there as well. Don't want to give away too many names. Go check it out.
Yeah.
So here we are at 12:40. Anything left substantive that we need to talk about that we've missed? Looking through the chat, um, I don't see a ton of questions in there that we haven't already talked about. But
Yeah, it's gonna be tough to pick an MVP for this week.
yeah, might have to go with that one. Might have to double up, and then the prize would be a couple $1,000. Brian Evans in the chat mentioned left tackle is the most important position after quarterback on the field. That
Yeah.
he and I are in the same vein. Are we ready to turn to the top 5?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, top 5.
So
you want to clarify or quantify or shrink the pool? So go ahead. Tell me what the rules are so I
all
can
right.
pick them.
So top 5. Let's go dramas, binge-worthy stuff. I think everything is streaming. If you want to go Sopranos, I think that's I kind of consider the Sopranos like the first like binge-worthy show, even though that was on HBO.
Can I tell you something?
Go ahead.
I've never watched it.
Really?
Never got into it. I just didn't like it for some reason, and I love most everything, but I just didn't like
So
that.
I didn't watch it until maybe like, I don't know, 5 years ago or so. I missed the initial wave because it came out when I was in college and I was poor, so I'm not gonna pay for HBO. So I watched it. I liked it, you know.
I tried to explain to my boys about Scarface the other day,
Mhm.
and because that's sort of the gold standard to those type
Yeah.
shows. I mean, there's a bunch of others out there, or those type, that movie. But I never watched Sopranos. So, and I think for my purposes, when I was doing this, Don, it is like The Wire and Breaking
Mhm.
Bad. Those are consistently top 5, and I sort of take them off the board, because I try to expand my
Well, I
horizons.
almost feel like The Wire is still, like, under talked about.
From a law enforcement standpoint, and I know a plenty, from my life, not because they were on the other side of the law than I was, because I worked with a plenty of them. That show is as accurate as there
I
is
agree.
in real life.
And that's for me, what has drawn me to it, and I don't know a whole lot of law enforcement people, but growing up
You know a
in
couple.
I do. Um, Growing up in the city of Philadelphia, terms like corner boys and stick up kids and that sort of stuff that is never in anything else but is in The Wire and just the fact that you kind of see just the individual sort of entities have you ever read the book Freakonomics?
I have not.
Okay, well, it actually has a chapter dedicated to, I think it was in Cleveland, but basically a drug organization, and talk about just how actually sophisticated it is from an organization standpoint. But anyway,
Yep.
we're going down a whole different thing. But yeah, that's
No,
what
it
makes
is.
The Wire awesome.
Yeah, and it's absolutely sophisticated. It's
Yeah.
like, you can even go back to, the times of the pyramids and all those type things, and we are getting down the rabbit hole. But like folks say, oh, they didn't have power, they hadn't had this or that. Unless you believe that all that stuff was built by aliens, like some people I know
Some people
believe,
do.
that's pretty sophisticated. Anyway, let's go. Give me your
All right.
top 5.
Well, what do we have? Let's read some. There's some top fives in the chat, and then there were some on the board.
I'll throw up Crawley's. Sopranos, he agrees with you. I guess that's Curb Your Enthusiasm, Wire, Always Sunny, and Entourage. I have not seen any of those but The Wire. Are they worthy of consideration?
Yeah, so like I said, I feel like Sopranos. Now, Sopranos aren't on my top 5, but they are the original ones that fit into this category. Seen The Wire, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I love, but it's a comedy. I would kind of put it into a different category. I have not seen. I've seen a couple episodes. Curb Your Enthusiasm. I like it because I like Seinfeld. I haven't watched a whole lot of it. And Entourage is I have not seen.
All right, so let's go Alan Minton. Jack Ryan, that's low-key good show. I kinda
I have
like
not
that
seen
show.
that.
It's
Okay.
kinda hard, And again, I didn't watch The Office, but if I'm not mistaken, the main character,
Yeah,
Jack
Jim.
Ryan's on The Office as well. Shout out to Justified. I mentioned that last week. Is one of my favorites, and you haven't
I
watched it yet.
Yes, I added it, and I I think I'm getting ready to watch it because I think I'm in between shows now.
All right. Game of Thrones is in my top 5. So Justified and Game of Thrones, I'm putting in my top 5. Love Game of Thrones. It's like everything else. Really, it's like a scary movie.
Yeah.
They start out good and they get stupid at the end. Well, Game of Thrones got a little rushed, but then House
Yes.
of the Dragon and all that. I love it. I'm a big dragon person. So anybody
I
that's
am
got
not.
dragons,
I am not, but I liked it because it was so layered. I actually, for the first few seasons, actually probably all of them except for maybe the last one, I had a website I went to that actually showed me where all the families and who was connected to who, just because I had a hard time keeping track, and it was very, very helpful.
yeah, I've got a little bit of obsession with dragons, both in the man cave and on my body. So Prison Break, great first series or great first season, got kind of silly like the rest of them do, and then Sons of Anarchy.
I
I
didn't
love
like.
that show. You didn't like that?
No, because I felt like it's too predictable. I want something that I can't predict. They don't. If you watch, they only lost one fight. That was when Opie died in jail. Other than that, they won every single fight. And it was just like they were clearly made them out to be this, untouchable group, and all the other groups just always were less than them. It just drove me nuts.
I will say this from my life experience is that while I'll mention The Wire is the most realistic, Sons of Anarchy is one of the ones they hate, that real life people hate the most because it glorifies
Yeah.
that behavior or that lifestyle. And quite frankly, if you're around and out and about a lot, that lifestyle can be quite detrimental to the community
Yeah.
at large. Let's go Preston again. Sopranos, Arrested Development, never watched it. Eastbound and Down, I feel like I've probably lived that, so I haven't watched it. And there's your other 2 that we've mentioned already.
Yeah. So, Arrested Development, another comedy. It's good. It's a unique, unique, I don't know, humor, I guess.
So give me your list here,
All
because
right. So I have. All right. So here are. I'm going to give you my 5, and I have a bunch that I'm just going to throw out there. People want a new show to watch, sort of thing. All right. My number 1 is Breaking Bad. I feel like that's the best show ever. I love the twists and turns, the unpredictability, all that sort of stuff. The writing was just unreal. The acting was unreal. Love that.
favorite character in that? Is it Walter White or is it
It,
somebody else?
I think Walter White. I'm a big what's his name? What's the actor's name?
Cranston.
Cranston. I'm a big Cranston fan.
Have
So
you ever watched Your Honor? It's on
yes,
Showtime.
I just finished Your Honor, which is
He's
another
pretty
one.
awesome in that.
So I just finished the second season, which is another
Yeah.
one where the second season I thought was. I loved how they changed up the second season because it's so hard sometimes, especially with how the first season ended. I'm not going to ruin anything for anyone. But I felt like the last episode they rushed into everything, which kind of pissed me off a little bit. But anyway,
another one of those things that could be realistic.
Yeah.
Because what happens in it, yeah, for sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
All right. Number 2 for me was The Wire, for the reasons we talked about. Good acting too, but good writing, very realistic. Number 3 for me, Succession. And I'm watching the last season now. So I'm in the middle of that. Have you seen that?
I tried it. I couldn't get into it. I may go back to it.
Go back to it. It's really good. I think the first season's good. Second season is really, really good. That's the one that won all the awards. But I think it's good. The acting is unbelievable. The dialogue, probably the best dialogue you're going to hear. The one-liners, especially if you like filthy jokes, it's great. And if you like to kind of love to hate people, that whole family, especially some of those, the worst thing was when they had I haven't seen it, but they had a baseball game. And this worker, they were like, "Hey, just come up here," and you're like, "If you hit this," or I can't remember what it was, "I'm going to give you I think it was $1 million or whatever it was," and the guy couldn't, and so he had the check written up, and in front of the guy's family, he just rips up the check. I just thought it was like the crappiest thing, but it just kind of epitomizes. Anyway, all right. So that was my number 3. I went for 4. I went Ozark. Have you seen Ozark on Netflix?
Yeah, I've watched that.
Yeah, I like that. I love the way the twists and turns, also, especially at the end of each season.
Favorite character?
Man. Oh, no, this is easy. What's her name?
The girl?
The girl with the blonde hair. I think unbelievable job.
Ruth.
Acting in that. Ruth. Yes. And she was great with the one-liners and the things she said. And she listened to a lot of the same hip hop that I grew up listening to too, which always helped certain places. But that was like, you felt for her, you felt for different characters at different times. That was really good. I struggled number 5 because I have a bunch of them. I went, God.
I'm impressed by your level of research and thought on this because I don't even have a list. I'm just going to reel them off for you.
So I have different shows. Like I'll throw on The Office when I'm working, and then there's certain things where I'm like, all right, I'm putting everything away. I'm watching this, and that's what these kind of fall into. Where I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to nitpick, and if it's a crappy show, I will turn it off. Or unless I have to kind of finish it because my wife's into it, which happened with Sons of Anarchy. And also, I wasn't a big Mad Men fan. We watched the entire thing. I don't know. It was cool just because of the authenticity of like the old times and everything. Have you seen Mad Men?
I have not.
But
you're making my world so much better because I got things to do these days.
Yeah, well,
I can watch them.
So my number 5, and I'm gonna get God. All right, I'll go Your Honor for number 5. That'd be my number 5. But here, you give me yours, and then I'll throw out some other names if people want some shows to watch.
Okay, so I kind of took The Wire, Breaking Bad. Those I did like Sons of Anarchy, even though what you said was right. I kind of take them off the table because they're too easy. And one thing is, I think I clarified and said it needed to be more than one season, and it technically is more than one season. But the first season of True Detective, I mentioned that last week, talking about Matthew McConaughey. If you haven't watched it, you have to watch it.
Okay, I'm going to put awesome. True Detective. I'm writing that down.
Season 1 with Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey.
Okay.
And there's a few other things in there worth watching as well. Great dialogue. This is what's fascinating to me with this stuff, is when I watch these shows, whether it's Justified, who's on my list, whether it's any of these, is how fascinating the writing is.
Yeah.
How brilliant the people are that write this.
That's what I look for. Great writing.
Yeah. And just some, like Justified's got so many great lines and so many different angles and avenues. So that's up there. So season 1, True Detective, Justified, Game of Thrones.
Okay.
I love that stuff for aforementioned reasons. 1883.
Okay, I have not seen that.
Is that the one?
Is that Yellowstone?
Yes, it's the first season. It's got Tim McGraw and Faith Hill and the blonde-haired young lady that's on it. That's sort of the narrator, and it starts out, man. It ripped me up to see that.
Yellowstone, my wife watched that by herself because my brother told me Yellowstone was like Sons of Anarchy, only in the
in the Wild West.
Wild West. And so I was like, oh, F that. So my wife watched that by herself.
Well, no, I mean, it's pretty good. It's got, I always wonder why Kevin Costner's got the talk.
Yeah.
So like that all the time. That sort of cracked me up. But that's a good show. And then what else? Where am I? God, I can't remember now. You made me see. This is why I should write things down, so I can complete my 5 with.
See, I got my list.
Yeah, The Wire. So I'll go The Wire. Season 1 of True Detective.
You said the 18.
Yeah, 1883.
Okay.
Justified. So I need one more. I mean, I could round it out with Sons of Anarchy, but there's something else I'm forgetting, and I took notes somewhere. I just can't remember them. But the bottom line is, like we talked about, I want to watch stuff. For the longest time, I trended away for things that reminded me of my 9 to 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like and I don't know if it fits for you, but like you cover recruiting. Do you want to watch a series about recruiting? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I
it
mean,
was
I
like,
well, I do, but I can
well,
understand. No, I like so one of my good friends was a criminal attorney in Wake County, and he ended up being like, look, he only watches fiction or reads fiction or whatever because he said real life was just he deals with real life too much with his actual work life. So I understand.
yep. And so look, I went back and I found it.
Okay.
I don't know if it qualifies for a series, but The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls thing.
That was
It's
really, really good, but I feel like that's a documentary.
yeah, you're probably right. Um, Bosch, I like Bosch.
I have not watched Bosch.
Yeah, so I'll throw that in there. I
Okay.
had Jack Ryan season 1 and 2. Walking Dead, the first couple seasons were great.
Yeah, so I really, really like Walking Dead, and I don't like zombie stuff. That's not me. But and I try to explain to people who are like, "Oh, it's about zombies." The zombie stuff is in the background. It's just basically whatever would happen here if there was some sort of apocalypse that would cause people just go nuts and lose everything. And that's
Yeah.
what it was for the longest time. But yeah, it just got stale. And then they just didn't want to. They should have killed what's his name.
Negan,
Um,
come on, man.
well, they should have killed him, yes. But I'm talking about what's the main character. What the hell is his?
I can't think of his name, but he eventually died off.
Well, he disappeared. They never found his body.
Oh yeah, you're right. Look, I've got something on here that I did not a couple I didn't mention, and I saw somebody earlier, maybe last week. The Americans,
Yes.
fantastic.
So I think to me, the best endings, and usually the endings all suck, but I thought the Americans ending was awesome. Better Call Saul was awesome, and Shameless, which is a comedy drama, which
Yeah,
almost made my top 5. I probably should have put it in my top 5 to be honest, but
and then Narcos. The first couple of years of Narcos, I thought
yeah,
were
I
great.
like
Cool.
Narcos. I just don't like reading. You
I
know?
don't. Yeah, you kind of lose yourself in it, and then
Yeah.
spinoff of Narcos, and it's one of those things where I have a hard time separating the actor for how you got to know them versus what they're on now. Is Last of Us. I don't know if
Oh,
you watched it. I played
no.
all the video games. Last of Us is based on the video games. It's amazing.
Okay. I
But
added that.
yeah, the theme for all this, and I have a bunch written down, but the theme of all of it is and The Outsider, the first couple of episodes of The Outsider is great. It got silly. But the theme of all of them, like we mentioned, is the writing. So
Yeah.
I need actors I like,
Yeah.
or I need a show that can make me really dislike somebody. Like, when you feel like I don't like that
Yes.
person.
I am
And
with you 100%.
so
100%.
yeah, what's going to be our top 5 for next week? I got a lot of TV to watch somehow.
Well, let
I
me
need
give
a
you let me just
sponsorship.
throw some shows out there, okay? You mentioned Americans, I really like that. I like the authenticity of the time of the '80s and all that, and like I said, the ending I thought was awesome. Euphoria, which is a
I
little bit of
tried, man,
it's a
because I
little bit of
like
a teeny bopper, and there's a lot of wieners. You have to get
yes.
past they show a lot of wieners on there, that's a problem. But I thought it was really cool, and
It
very
is
realistic.
it is so much so because I like Zendaya, but man, it is rough. Some of those drug scenes I just kinda like, I
Yeah.
don't really want to watch this, and you're right about the other thing you mentioned, but yes, that is worth trying if you can stomach
The
the
wieners?
heavy drug use. I'm
Oh,
not gonna comment on
stomach
that
the
portion
wieners.
of it. You're trying to get us fired and removed from the air in our first show of the new year or the new name.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a time I'm gonna go back through and try to figure out. But yes, Euphoria. Go ahead.
Alright. Bloodline on Netflix, really good. I thought, they did a really good job even with continuing it. Check that out. Your Honor, we mentioned Westworld. Have you ever seen Westworld?
I have not watched it. I don't like the
Super
futuristic
weird.
stuff.
Super weird, but cool. Another weird one, Severance. Have you watched Severance?
Nope.
Another super weird one where they basically when they go to work, they don't remember what is happening at work because they had something done to their brain, and then when they leave work, they have their normal life, but they don't know what basically their work life and their normal life, they don't know what's going on in either, like 2 different people, but they kinda go crazy trying to figure it out. But anyway,
I kind of
it's
like that concept.
yeah, it's kinda cool. It's cool. Morning Show, which is on Apple, I like that. It has really good actors, Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston and what's her name? A bunch of really, really good actors. But so that kind of helps that. But it's basically kind of the same idea of what happened with the Today Show with
Right.
the anchor who was sexually harassing a fire. But so it's kind of that idea. But it's pretty cool. Homeland,
Yes.
that's really good. White Lotus, I
Never
kind of
watched
sort of liked. If you like good actors and good writing, there were some things I didn't like. It was too much connection sometimes, but City on a Hill, which has Kevin Bacon in it, and he plays this piece of crap. I think he's an FBI agent. And you want to talk about somebody you hate. You will hate him because he's such a low life and does so many crappy things, but you kind of sort of like him. I think it's pretty cool. Better Call Saul. I didn't want to, I mean, that probably would be in my top 5, but because of Breaking Bad, I didn't want to do it. But I was actually surprised. I purposely didn't watch it. And then like everyone kept on talking about how good it was. I thought the writing was unbelievable. And that ending I thought was really, really, really good. I think
Yep.
that's all I have on my list.
Yeah, and Don Dada on the message board mentioned Stranger Things, and my son said I had to mention that.
I watched the first season.
I
It's
like shows.
It's too teeny bopper-ish and too 80s.
Yeah, but I grew up then, right? So I was a teenager in the 80s, and when
Okay.
I see stuff like that and the music and whatever, and they're supposed to have, if they do a second season, Freddy Krueger's supposed to be in it, which leads me
Really?
to my suggestion of next week's top 5.
Okay.
Top 5 scary movies.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Can we do it?
We can do it.
So
But
folks, chime in.
I am really big on the watching these sort of dramas, this binge-worthy dramas. So I definitely, anyone has any sort of recommendations? I mean, right now I got plenty, but I
My
mean,
question is, when do you sleep?
I try to get my 2 hours of sleep every night.
Last question before we get out of here, because we're past the noon hour.
We are.
Is when you watch stuff on Netflix, and I don't think you can do it on Prime or some of the other streaming services, do you watch it faster?
No. Do you?
Well, I listen to podcasts at 1.5 because it
See, I don't do that either, but
makes me sound smarter. But I listen to like when I watch Netflix on my phone, because you can't do it on the TV, I watch it at 1.25.
really?
It doesn't really change the audio. They walk a little funny, but it allows me to watch episodes a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I think you need to make more time. I think you need to stop doing so many damn interviews.
Yeah,
Do one less interview and watch a show on
series.
normal speed.
Well, speaking of interviews, let's talk about content that's on Inside Carolina right now. Aside from Don Callahan's amazing work on The Scoop and all the recruiting stories, check out the Players Lounge with Drake May. That just dropped this morning. Taylor Vipolis and I talked to Drake at length yesterday, and we didn't talk about how many touchdown passes and how many yards he threw for. We talked about what makes Drake May, and the player, not just the player, but the person. And I think it's a pretty fascinating interview you want to check out. And then check out, we got a ton more of those player lounges coming over the course of the summer, as well as Jason Staples' scouting reports and breakdowns. Don will be reading them to learn more about team. So when we get into the season, we can talk about team and not just defer to me, as Don was apt to do the last few years of this formerly known as the Scoop podcast. And then, of course, all the basketball news, everything you want, and check out the baseball. I told you there's a huge series this weekend at Clemson. A lot going on with the baseball team, and a big time of the year for Scott Forbes and his bunch over there. And, of course, all the other sports at North Carolina Inside Carolina's got you covered. Don Callahan, it's been a pleasure, my friend. We went 1 hour and 4 minutes, and I feel like we just started.
Well, half of that we went on TV shows.
Hey, you got to talk about something. It's been fabulous. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Thanks to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring us. Thanks to Don Callahan for making time out of his day to talk to me and the rest of you
Tommy
guys
Ashley
about North Carolina football recruiting. We'll be back next week. Top 5, your homework. Top 5 scary movies, period. It can be any scary movie. It can be a movie that's not necessarily defined as a scary movie, but it's pretty scary. We'll talk then in 1 week. It'll seem like it's tomorrow, but it'll be a week from now on May 24th. Thanks, folks.